We live as mentally paralyzing lives as ever. The internet brings upon more information streams than our mind physically knows how to contain at once. Things like the Dunbar's number being complicated by the ease of forming parasocial relationships. We may well be maxed out and exhausted from forming more relationships. The cultural melting pot where we're exposed to more different viewpoints than ever has also scouted pre-established facts as a concept. For every belief that we hold or grew up believing, there's an anxiety in knowing that there are others out there that disprove them that we may not have the language to fend off. None of this is profound information and has been talked about by cultural pundits as a major determinant to polarized politics and a growing widespread narcissism as a remedy. Cultish consolidation of what one wants to believe in as a means of finding any footing at all. This is reflected in the congregation with the similarly like-minded online. Individuals Google searching to learn in ways to confirm existing biases and building an arsenal of knowledge from a self-serving buffet of information.
You know Bruce Lee's not really dead, don't you? Yeah, it's in a book.
Making communication outside of the cult, or even the self, a terrifying exploration of unknown territory. A mere difference in opinion is taken as a severe injustice sometimes. Thus the much talked about loneliness epidemic and rising narcissism's comorbidity with depression and anxiety. This Hobbesian underpinning, the potential for societal bonds to dissolve, has always threatened to be unleashed in the past, and has done with multiple deaths of God perhaps. But we've never had to manage such a significant amount of conflicting narratives. Something akin to a canon of facts, if not agreed upon first principles at least, lubricated society just enough to get through more disjointed slumps in the past, and will probably get through this current challenge as we always have done, even if things seem dismal at the moment. However, denial from people who are demonstrating all of the symptoms or contributing to the problem definitely can't be helpful though. We're not helping ourselves at the moment. It's easy for many at the forefront of this fragmentation to claim the issue of fragmentation in this current climate to be overstated an issue. Perhaps we're hearing from everyone at the prime of their egoistic joyride, but the endless amounts of studies restating the rise in mental health issues, declining community, and rising narcissism say to me that whatever we're currently doing isn't working. We're as unhappy as ever going about it this way, and regardless, one ought to relay the same lessons of what's important, like unity and love, with every generation, as we're always at risk of caving to the default inertia. It is the constructive that demands exertion on the other hand. It is the important points that deserve more symbolic capital. The default state and hedonism, less so. And yet we're hearing more advocacy for such states of being than ever. People at their most hedonistic would deny this being a problem at all, but we're becoming very unwell collectively, and a countervail against it is always needed. Postmodern theorists and their peddlers have for years seen these developments and social paralyzation as evidence of their distrust of facts and meta-narratives being proven correct, or at least that our notions of facts and history that have been constructed by oppressive and hegemonic forces needed only a participatory communication device like the internet to begin fracturing, whereas in the past, we could watch a poor finale to a TV show and be forced to tolerate its shitty writing decisions and unearned character arcs. We can now go on Rotten Tomatoes or confide in others in our distaste via X or TikTok. That's not such a bad thing. Communication platforms were seen as emancipating initially. Postmodernists would claim the internet space as a democratizing tool in its early beginnings for this reason, at least before the depressingly predictable infiltration of the space by old money and traditional institutions. The point of the product life cycle of outsider artists and amateur content where kids stacked books to make tripods, spearheading developments from an earthier standpoint, is long gone. In come the Jake Pauls, editors in numerous time zones, and your BBCs and CNNs of the world. The producers are increasingly bourgeois these days. The space hasn't been totally annexed, and what was unearthed is yet to be put back into the bottle. If anything, the popular slogans are now regurgitated by the actors and grifters, and we lap it up without a care. Hypnotized by the shadow paintings in the cave. Empowering messages and protest now a simulation or sloganized. Denialism remains, and it's been commodified like anything else. It's perhaps even the most profitable form of living for the corporations. Staying home more scrolling, more engagement with their content. Love yourself, cries the toxic positive self-love brigade, as obesity rises and more food is bought, more services needed to stay alive. Your emotions are valid, and so you have every reason to get as angry as the rage-baiting articles want you to get, and thus more engagement. It plays directly into their hands. And the particular form of behavior that we're seeing, and the ways that they're justified, say to me not that a lot of postmodern theories were valid, but rather that they're far less valid than we thought. Take the general postmodern notion that the seeking of power spearheads how we act, and that those with the power create discourses for their own gain, typically attributed to Foucault, or that the structure of language privileges a binary over another, and thus ought to be rebelled against with deliberateness and even iconoclasm, to achieve agency and potential for equality. You may attribute this to Derrida. It doesn't take a surgeon to see the mangling up of how words are used and the power-driven language games by people on the internet as something akin to these ideas being acted out, even if they haven't read Foucault or Derrida. People mar language to attain power. The changing of the definition of words to suit oneself or as a means of protest, overemphasizing a minority or margin component through whataboutisms in a conversation that isn't about you to make it about you, it's an often seen tyranny of the minority and plugging into the mode of contrarian criticality, which goes to show the level of depth in such theories. It's what a lot of nihilist tilting people would have been doing anyways. I've always seen postmodern texts as an intellectualized version of what's closer to baseline. That default inertia I spoke of, it's really not as deep as a lot of their disciples think it is. The people who wrote the texts just took the extra steps in defining these dynamics by writing it down, which makes it sound deeper than it is, especially in the way it's written. I think that's also why it has such a profound influence on younger people who are seduced by the ideas of staying in their adolescence. If there isn't such a thing as a canonical set of facts, then you're less compelled to go through the arduous task of learning them. You get to prolong your infantility and avoid working with your environment. It mirrors what you see amongst poorer scholars in academia who arm themselves with basic deconstructivist devices like how the world is oppressively sexist or racist, so they'll have something to say about the canon of works, even without reading them, so they can dodge becoming as well-rounded and literate whilst thinking they know a lot, when really they know just a one or two meta-theories. It's a weaponization of ignorance through pretenses. The media space is also a playground for the adolescent mind to stay adolescent through reflexive solipsism. Much has been made about how the behavior here, and in rising adults on college campuses roundly, are the signs of delayed play gratification that they've been robbed of. I see this as the main driver of online behavior, as in the grand scheme of things, we've not had the space for long, and the manual for knowing how to protect your own well-being on it isn't dished out to everyone, which makes arming them with postmodern theory all the more self-defeating. That's why the types of people who display typically nihilistic internet user traits are then eager to buy into postmodern or post-structural theory when they stumble upon the literature. Based on my eye test at least. It seems to be a pipeline for a lot of people. Postmodernism seems to have been exposed as intellectualized inertia and symbolically infantile by these practical outcomes. They may say that it's impossible to truly know anything, but it seems to me that they want for it to be impossible just as much. As an ism that is similarly difficult to define, these outcomes are what I'm judging it by. The problem with any critique of postmodernism is that the intensely loyal devotees will never be satisfied with your definition of postmodernism. No matter what you say, they'll say you merely didn't understand it, or that the people and texts cited are not postmodern. Some even that there isn't such a thing as postmodernism at all, which are the exact words of trained college professors that I've come across.
Postmodern neo-Marxism or something. I have no idea what that is. I study this stuff, I teach this stuff, and postmodernism doesn't exist to me, really.
So postmodernism gives nihilists a way out and is treated as undefinable selectively to avoid criticism. I'd say a lot of this is like a Freudian narcissism of the small differences. If you're willing for the nursery to stay open for your own lethargy's sake, then no doubt you'd shift goalposts continually to avoid being seen or having ever to make concessions about your frailties, continually pivoting to avoid engagement. And if indeed postmodernism doesn't mean anything, then why such aggro at a critique of such? I think it's because they want the theorists they've deified or use as validation to be free of challenge to avoid being judged like they do to those before them, that they also don't know enough about. In the same way internet solipsists or bad scholars don't know about the things they dismiss for their own convenience. Obviously there are culture warriors on all sides that are deliberate in applying post-structural theories to their content production and consumption. Lefties, when asked to define ACAB, would have even bastards in quotation marks, because it doesn't mean what the word typically means. I've seen right-wingers, on the other hand, repaint the picture of colonialism as a wider concept altogether even. Some may have read such theories as Hayden White's notion that historical events are narrativized with a political agenda as impetus to revise history itself with their own agenda, whether as protest or consolidation. Some may have read Althusser's rounding of pretty much everything being propagandistic on some level as their impetus for exploring the boundaries of their behavior, so to protest against a system they're fundamentally forced to operate within: language, posting habits, aesthetics, etc.
And he's claiming mental incapacity due to the influence of the internet reducing his attention span against his own will.
Perhaps they read Rousseau's theses on reason being the cause for moral decay and have decided to act as unreasonably as possible as a form of protest. All of this could obviously be intentional, led first by theory before behavior, but it's more likely that it's filling the blanks in after the fact. The application of the theory to justify the existing behavior, to imbue antisocial behavior with grandiose meaning, as the text is slanted in whatever direction needed to dismiss criticism or that it even is postmodern. That's why I've been careful not to attribute too many of these general tenets of postmodernism to many named figures. They might profess to sell a solution to the problems they help outline, and if I mention thinker X, you might rebuttal me by referencing an obscure quote of theirs to prove they were more constructive than I'm giving them credit for.
Whenever Foucault, Baudrillard, Deleuze, Guattari, Derrida, any time that these thinkers are challenging power, they are existing right in line with Kant's vision of the Enlightenment.
Or that they're not postmodernist altogether as a result. At the same time, ignoring the countless amount of quotes that say they aren't here to help the cause or are in disbelief of things that help us act in the world, like reason or science. This is a frequent tactic I see to maintain talking about pretenses and never the practical outcomes. That's not true communism. That's not true postmodernism, etc. Lots of people claim to be helping the cause when they aren't by their actions at all. This is the same largely with the postmodernists and how their ideas are used, not least by the inadvertent on the internet. So this is a consequentialist assessment, or something like System Semantics by John Gall. The practical outcome to postmodern text isn't to help build anything, but to aid people in their nihilism and justify their own seeking of power. The aforementioned social congregating, where a lie can be told 1,000 times to become mythologized, Think to the constant spin doctoring in Trump supporters groups, the repeated regurgitation in Biden's that he isn't old and off of it, the painting of men or women as caricatured scapegoats in incel and femcel groups respectively, where everyone's ex is unilaterally agreed to be a narcissist here, or the nihilists meeting up on our nihilism to uniformly agree on how life is meaningless. It's all dictated by a will towards power of sorts, as Nietzsche would call it. Different groups online batter the truth or generate their desired reality differently. Whilst Foucaultians may dispute these people having genuine power, and that the people without excess of such cannot dictate proceedings no matter how they operate, the internet has granted the pretense of such, if not actual power, in its communication dynamics. Whether or not it actually hurts anyone doesn't change the fact that you're immoral if you're trying to hurt someone. And that allowance changes our expectations in real life too. You can block someone online if they're correcting you and you don't want to have your preferred worldview dismantled, but in real life, you can't pause their speech and go to a more palatable tab. You can't turn your mind off to a learning experience in real life in quite the same way. It's made us more sensitive to these non-digital environments, thus the demand for trigger warnings or safe spaces. The internet gives people new kinds of power that twists our expectations in real life and changes how we act. You see the same self-serving use of language in real life too. Look to how regularly people redefine words on the spot to cover for their own lack of intelligence.
Authenticity. Am I saying that word?
Authenticity?
What is it?
Authenticity.
I said authenticity. That's what's in the dictionary.
Yeah.
I'm my own dictionary. I don't play no game.
To not know how to talk now is paraded as a vernacular, so something like a Baudrillardian social space is growing, with our media exposure dictating how we think life ought to be, all whilst we're on our phones and devices more than ever and going outside less than ever. So our media has become the epistemic resource, or at least a much larger component than it used to be. A hypodermic needle of sorts is back into the fore. Kenneth Gergen assesses that this environment of technology subsumes the body and grounds our identity within media content, creating the age of the techno-personal self. Media is our reality. We rely on media more than ever now to learn how to act. All whilst the media from our purview is as hyper-curated to our short-grasping desires as ever. In the past, when people read newspapers, they could have picked it up just for the headline, and when they finished, they would have to venture outside of their comfort zone to read a section about, say, baseball or politics. Nowadays, you can finish up on a Netflix show and be recommended something the algorithm thinks is as alike with the previous experience as possible. This is before we even get to what we can do with the space ourselves. Our perceptual reality is designed to cater to certain whims. With less impetus to become more well-rounded, we become further intolerant and prone to the hipster effect. It takes willful effort to curate a space that encourages growth and introspection. The newfound sensitivity rears its head in the constant demands for normalizing this or that, whatever behaviors that one isn't willing to change, so the world has to eat its cost, granting what we used to all do to coexist with civility as masking by all the people claiming to be neuroatypical, when really they're just socially underdeveloped, no thanks to such self-defeating dynamics. Diagnoses for autism has skyrocketed since the turn of the century. It's the normalizing of new narratives, new postmodern discourses, often in excessive demands for being worked around, to create a more snuggly reality through normalizing the abnormal. The granting of old words imbued with new meaning to describe things away, brain fog, being claimed by people who are maybe just stupid and need to read more books. Change in language itself isn't an issue, but there's not much of sophistication driving such lethargy, but rather lethargy itself. Gaslighting is another term, originating from psychology proper, that has slipped into the common parlance to shut any dissent down, with no regard for where the word came from. Anyone calling you out for lying can be dismissed as gaslighting. It's something like a naturalistic fallacy at play, slave morality in Nietzsche's conception, or the inner citadel by Isaiah Berlin. If we can't have what we want, we teach ourselves to want what we have, devaluing those who have it better than us in the process. Besides the excess of choice being a factor, we're probably as inclined as ever to pivot for power to narrativize our lives, to give it any meaning at all. Every generation seems to have a great struggle to overcome, as has been narrativized and aestheticized in itself as a story. I think a lot of people now are desperate to feel part of something as important to effectively justify their standing in comparison.
You love the idea of being a rebel, but you haven't proved to me or anybody exactly what being a rebel is. What are you rebelling against?
Political actors have flat out said that they want to look for the same struggles, assuming that there are struggles that are comparable at all. There's great want to actualize identity through changing the facts. The culture of victimhood narrativizes your life in a similar manner. If you're the martyr of some injustice, then you're absolved from having to succeed or be judged in the same way. We're terrified of being seen, so we obscure ourselves until we gain confidence. That's why emo bangs are typically a teenaged phenomena. That's why bad artists hide behind style. Obscurantism creates the impression of depth. It is both a shortcut to and counterfeit of real growth. The way people weaponize their trauma or subjugated socioeconomic status as the reason for their piss-poor grammar or ignorance in online discussions is no longer such a valid one in an age where we could literally Google synonyms and fact-check things with just the slightest amount of effort. To still remain linguistically obtuse or willingly become an exception to the Flynn effect is then a design choice. And that's only the people who are supposedly subjugated and not primed with the best education to help steer them clear of such pitfalls. Everyone's got a supercharged reason for inertia, intellectual lethargy, what the Greeks called acedia. We have more resources than ever to not be ignorant, and yet we're expecting to be tolerated for our ignorance more than ever. Whereas in the past, we had to venture into the unknown for growth, we see no reason why we have to now, at even such a core level to our species. In even talking to someone slightly different to our echo chamber inhabitants, more men or women opting out of the dating pool because it's not living up to their Disneyfied fantasies, or they're primed to expect the caricatures painted online. In the same way internet users are insulated from immediate consequences or taken far from the earthier planes of needing to coexist to survive, postmodernism has generally been a higher intellectual endeavor, a privileged field where you're allowed to cynically break things apart without risk of getting hurt. The exact same tilt towards deconstructivism playing out has exposed the privilege in postmodern schools. It doesn't work on ground. People who rely on their facts or narratives to survive aren't helped by the appeals, nor is ego empowerment and opting out helpful to soothing the crisis of loneliness. This isn't to say that postmodernism is totally pointless, but this is to offer a countervail. We have to deconstruct for the sake of building something, rather than provide ourselves with a false sense of identity. You can say that the postmodern condition is merely the reality for those who don't know enough about the world, who aren't willing to venture into the unknown. We're not the only ones in the world, nor the media space. It's on us to make it habitable. Coexisting with one another may be uncomfortable and requires constant improvisation, as is learning the canon and allowing yourself to be judged by it by your own accord a daunting task. However, owning up to a real failure not only helps stave off these postmodern blues and fosters growth, but it also makes you more likable, and if we all did that, we'd maybe get along a little better.